Happy New Year's, everyone. This is Lisa Taylor of Beyond Betrayal Community, and you're listening to the first episode of our videocast series on betrayal pain. Today's session is being recorded live from New Zealand on January 2nd, 2016. Beyond Betrayal is both a book and an online community dedicated to supporting women who have been betrayed by their husbands in any form. We conduct research on the effects of betrayal and then share the results of that, including women's personal stories. The research is shared in our video series, such as the one you're watching right now, blog posts, the Beyond Betrayal book, and a weekly newsletter. Please note that while Beyond Betrayal is a faith-based community, all women who struggle with betrayal pain are welcome. To learn more about us or share your story with us, check out beyondbetrayal.community. Today, I'm thrilled to be interviewing Shelley Martinkus of Redemptive Living for Women. Shelley is joining us from Colorado. Welcome, Shelley.
Hi, thank you, Lisa. I'm so excited to be here.
Thank you. Hey, did I say your last name correctly? Because people have trouble with it.
Yeah, so I think you did well. It's Martinkus.
Martinkus. Yeah, some of the women, some of my Kiwi friends here in my group have various ways of saying it. So it's good to clarify for us.
Yeah.
So despite being a young woman, Shelley is a veteran on this journey. She's not only walked her own incredibly painful journey of healing from betrayal, she's been helping other women for many years now. Today, Shelley is going to share some of her story and discuss the issues of shock and denial that many betrayed wives face. We'll end by having her tell us a bit more about the support Redemptive Living for Women offers. Shelley, you've shared a lot of your story in both the Kitchen Convo series you and your husband Jason have put out, as well as your excellent workbook for betrayed wives, Rescued, which I have with me, and Women in New Zealand. I'm kind of one of the sources of this book right now, so just contact me if you would like a copy, and I will get it to you a lot cheaper than you can order it via Amazon or any one of the online resources, because we're just trying to get this out there and make it available to women who need it. Could you, Shelley, tell us a bit more about the discovery of Jason's sex addiction and how that affected you initially?
Yeah, so we are 12 years into our process. So it was just over 12 years ago that I confronted Jason and demanded he tell me the truth about his past. However, I knew from shortly after we started dating, we met in college. And we dated for 5 years. And during that time, deep down, I knew something wasn't right. I couldn't put my finger on it, but I just had this gut feel. So, when we got engaged and the day I walked down the aisle and married Jason, deep down, I knew something was wrong. So a couple of years into our marriage, and let me just back up one more time. I would go to Jason during those first couple of years, during our engagement as well, but during those first couple of years of our marriage, I would go to Jason and say, is there something going on? I feel like there's something that's not quite right. And you're shaking your head. And I feel like a lot of women can relate to that, just trying to find out what's going on between us. And he would always just say, no, there's nothing going on. And I would walk away feeling a little more crazy, and also just feeling like my expectations are just too high for marriage and I just need to bring them down. So a couple of years into our marriage, we were actually lying in bed one night, and just the tone of his voice, he said, I need to tell you something. And I could tell it was going to be a game changer. And so I just remember saying, okay. And then he proceeded to share with me that he had almost had an affair with a woman that he was working with. And the way I like to say it is, it's like he opened that door into his secret world and then he shut it quick, because after he said that, he didn't want to talk about it anymore. He said, what's in the past will stay in the past. Let's move forward. And I was naive and enough denial, honestly, to say, okay, yeah, let's move forward. And so I booked a trip to Las Vegas, of all places. And on that trip, I told Jason that I forgave him, and I decided that it was my fault. I didn't even know what had happened, but I just decided it's my fault. And what I need to do is become a sexy wife in order to save my marriage. And so for 9 months, I worked at trying to be this sexual being for Jason. And I ended up 9 months after that pseudo confession. I was on a trip with a girlfriend, and it's like my soul was still for the first time in a long time. And what I recognized was I hadn't forgiven Jason. My heart was so bitter and so resentful. And I felt convicted because I knew that God forgives me, Jesus forgives me, but I can't forgive my husband for what I don't know. And so I realized I couldn't do my life this way. My heart was sick, and I needed to go home and work toward forgiveness. I ended up, and I don't necessarily recommend this, but I ended up calling that other woman and having a conversation with her. And then I confronted Jason. And so that was, again, about 12 years ago that I confronted him and asked for him to tell me the truth. He lied 3 times. And after that 3rd time, I said, we're done. And I shut the bedroom door and locked it and tried to go to sleep. I think probably a lot of your listeners know how difficult that is in the midst of this. And I mean, it's just so ugly and so messy, and sleep did not come to me. And so kind of fast forwarding, well, and actually let me backtrack. Jason, about 2 weeks prior to me confronting him, had reached his lowest point. He had cried out to God hundreds of times, but for whatever reason, this time was different. And he told God, I don't care what it takes. If I lose my wife, if I lose my marriage, lose my house, lose my job, I have to be right with you. And it's as if he heard God say, okay. And so then it was like, God started laying out that breadcrumb trail for me to start figuring out, okay, hold up. I feel bitter and resentful, and I haven't forgiven him, and I need to be whole, and how can I do that? And so because Jason had hit his rock bottom, about 3 days after I confronted him, he chose to tell me the truth. And so that really was the beginning of our healing, is when Jason chose to tell me the full truth. And so it had started when he was a young boy. He was exposed to pornography, and it had just escalated through the years, where he started chatting online and meeting up with women from the internet, both before we married and then those first 3 years of our marriage.
Yeah, it's a big story, and it's a bitter and a hard story. And I feel like there's a lot of young women out there that I meet young women struggle more, I think, with coming out and getting help. They're told more that this is just normal. Your expectations are too high for yourself, and just pretend it's not happening.
Yes.
And it's so good to see a young woman who's struggled through this, who's put up some boundaries, who's prepared to lay down the hard consequences, and who's also walked with her husband through, out of a really deep level of addiction. And I'm very, there are people who say, well, it's a success story if the couple comes out together. That's not my definition of a success story. It's a woman who survives is a success story. A woman who gets through and finds that she's even more whole and even more healthy and even closer to God than she was before she knew anything. That's an amazing success story.
Yes.
You've got both. So this is
Yeah.
a really big success story.
Mm-hmm.
So thank you so much for sharing that.
Mm-hmm.
Now, you have been a group facilitator for how long? How long has Redemptive Living for Women been going?
Yeah, well, and I want to back up just to, I want to comment on what you said. You know,
Okay.
I think I agree with you. I think a lot of times women, they feel like they'll have a story or it'll be a success story if their husband chooses to change. But we have no control over that. And even for those women listening that their husbands are choosing to take the steps toward wholeness and healing, the reality is we don't know what the next second brings. You know what I mean? Like
Totally.
and I know that can be triggering for some women to hear that, but even for you and I, we don't know what tomorrow might bring. And so it's trusting God first and foremost and taking our husband off that pedestal that we had them on, because we don't know how our story will end.
Yeah,
Actually.
absolutely.
Yeah.
I tell that to women. Of the women who did that first survey that I did in 2014, there was like close to 700 women. 51% of them were alone. And
Mm.
I tell women who are alone, like, my daily reality is that I don't know if I will be here tomorrow. I don't know if my husband will be here tomorrow. That is part of my new ongoing reality.
Yes.
I cannot rely on there being a marriage next year.
Right. Right.
So if that's where my hope is, I'm in trouble.
Mhm. Yeah.
So
And that's scary. It's hard to
it
work through
is.
that, you
It
know?
is.
It's scary, and it's challenging to live in the moment and not to worry about the future or fret about the future, but just to stay present. That's a whole other topic.
It is. That's this whole huge other topic. Though I
Yeah.
think it does work in with denial, because denial is, in some ways, is about never being present. It's never being present to
Yeah.
the current reality that I have.
That's true.
And I understand we have to work our way into that, because, like, as you say, it's really hard, that idea that I may not be married tomorrow. I cannot trust in that. And
Mhm.
to many women, that seems impossible to begin with. What do you
Yeah.
mean you have to live with that level of doubt all the time? Well, you just do. And the reality is that we tend to build our security on false things all the
Mhm.
time. You would have been fairly young when 9/11 happened. Well, you would
I
guess.
wasn't that young.
I was okay. You were still you're an adult. Okay.
Yeah, I was.
But and this does not, this won't compute as well to my friends in New Zealand and Australia, but those, I was living in Canada at the time, and everything around that really shook people. I think the biggest shakeup was that we have all been living with a false sense of security.
Right.
The reality is our lives are in God's hand every moment of every day,
Mhm.
and
Mhm.
it would be nice if this was all here tomorrow, but we have to get ourselves in a place mentally, emotionally, where it's okay if it's not. And it's
Right.
really okay. It's not just like I'm living like in a war zone and I'm traumatized all the time. It's like the core of my being is okay
Okay.
if it all
Yeah,
goes
and
away.
yeah, and you said like we have to live with the doubt, and we do, and at the same time I think there's a peace. Like, it's not like you and I walk around with doubt all day every
Yeah.
day. There's a peace. I mean, there's truly, it's a sweet surrender. It's not always easy, and yet there's a freedom there. There's a freedom in getting to that
Absolutely.
place, and it's so hard.
Yeah.
It's so hard to get there.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it is. God calls it, make me your refuge, and it's
Mhm.
again and again in the Psalms and the Bible, and, you know, um, yeah, but nowhere does it say that's easy. I mean, there's a reason
Right.
it's said again and again and again. So we need to hear
Yeah.
it again and again and again.
Right.
But
So true.
when we get there, it is an incredibly free place, and in a lot of ways, it is a much freer, healthier, whole place than where
Mhm.
we started. Because I do think a lot of
Mhm.
us start with our husbands on a pedestal, or our marriages on a pedestal, our families
Definitely.
on a pedestal.
Yes.
And it's
Yes.
about learning who's really God.
Yeah. Well, and I also just want to comment that, we're like, I think I can speak for both of us that we're still on this journey. It's not like we're, at the end and like, great. Maybe I thought that. I think at the beginning I thought I would get there, and now 12 years in, I recognize that this is a lifelong
Yeah.
process. It doesn't mean that I'm dealing with the hurricane of grief day in and day out. I'm not there anymore, but it is a lifelong process. And so I kind of equate maybe that surrendering to riding a bike, except it's the opposite of riding a bike. So, for us, when we learn to ride a bike, we can just hop right on and we don't even have to think about it. That's not the case with letting go and surrendering to God, in my opinion. It feels like every day I'm learning how to ride the bike again, So it's
That's a
challenging.
great analogy. I
Yeah,
like that. Yeah.
it's challenging for
Yeah.
sure.
And so a lot of what we're talking about really is related to denial, because it is about accepting and making peace with the uncertainty.
Mm-hmm.
And because if we can't get to the place where God is our refuge, so we have a refuge. No one's going to survive without a refuge.
Yeah.
But if we can get to that place where we've got a refuge and it's God and He's unchanging,
Mm-hmm.
He's always for us.
Yeah.
He's, there's security in that. Everything else really is shifting sand.
Mm-hmm.
As
For
much as we'd
sure.
like to think it isn't, that it's all
Right.
permanent.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
let's now I'm going to ask that question again though about redemptive
Yeah.
living. How long have
Yeah.
you guys been around, and how long have you been working with women?
Yeah. Okay. So I quit my day job about 3.5 years ago. And so Jason had started Redemptive Living about 8 years ago. And I was like, no, 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 no. This is not what I'm going to do with my life. I don't want this to be my identity. And so the last 12 years, I mean, the process has been, it's been really hard. And I've been on the slow road. So just to give you a little bit of an idea, those first 3 years of my process, I felt like I was just kind of living day to day, grieving, working on owning my voice and feeling my feelings. And then after like about 3 years, I think I kind of was able to take a breath, like, okay, we've done it. We've made it. And at that time, Jason decided to return to school to become a counselor. And I wanted to take a little break from all of this. I didn't want this to be my life. Well, that little break turned into a 3-year break. And so 6 years into my process, I was in a place where I didn't know that I really trusted God, because I had decided to believe the lie that if He had allowed this to happen to me, who knows what else He might allow in my life. And I can't trust you. I will only trust myself. And I came to a place 6 years in where I realized I couldn't live that way either. That wasn't good for me. That wasn't good for my relationship with Jason. Obviously not good for my relationship with God. So I kind of hit rock bottom again. And so 6 years ago is when I really started to make some changes and work on myself, because I had seen Jason continuing to do all this hard work and I was kind of flailing in the background, and I was inspired by him and I wanted what he had. I saw the freedom he had and I was like, I want some of that. And so about 6 years ago is when I started my first group. And it was a group of about 7 women. I didn't know what I was doing. I just wanted to support them in their process. And little did I know it would be just as much for me. And so a year into us meeting, I told them, I said, I need you and I don't want to be the facilitator. Let's co-facilitate. And so we still meet to this day, me and those women. We don't have 7 anymore. Now it's 4 of us. And we've met every 2 weeks for 6 years. And so I think through that, I have wanted to provide a safe place for as many women as I can. Yeah. And so, like I said, about 3.5 years ago, I quit my day job, which was very hard. Talk about surrendering, and decided to give this a shot. So I've been doing it, really, really doing it for about 3.5 years.
Very cool.
Yeah.
That's so beautiful. And I love the organic process. That God taking you step by step
Yes.
to see this is it and you can do it, and developing your heart for it and your passion for it.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah, it's
awesome.
been awesome. It's been
Yeah.
awesome. And I did take a break in there when we had our third son. And I even thought like, oh, maybe I shouldn't do this. I'll just go back to my old career. And went to my go-to girls, went to my support group and was like, what do y'all think I should do? And they're like, you need to do support groups. So it's been amazing. In 2015, there were about 10 support groups running through Redemptive Living for Women. And it's been amazing. Yeah.
That's awesome. Yeah. And
Yeah.
since I've discovered you, I mentioned you a number of times in the blogs. You're mentioned in the book. I mean, you personally, but also Redemptive Living for Women. Fortunately, I found out about you before it went out to press. So,
Mm-hmm.
so I really recommend women looking for online support groups. Shelley's groups are online as well, so women from all over the world. And you have a woman from Australia, from
I
Queensland,
do. Yeah.
already in one of your groups. So,
Yes.
guys, even the time differences can be made to work.
That's
Uh,
right.
Group support is awesome. I
Yeah.
just run a little support group here in the Northland of New Zealand, and they're my go-to girls, and I'm sure we'll be meeting 10 years from now too.
Yeah,
Sa-
that's
Same
so
kind of
great.
thing, yeah.
Yeah.
So it's
Awesome.
just support is amazing. So
Mm-hmm.
let's see more of it happening. Um,
Mm-hmm.
so now you've had a chance to talk to many women over the course of the last 3.5 years.
Mm-hmm.
So do you see denial and like shock and denial as a common theme with betrayed wives?
Hmm. Well, I do. And even when I look back at my story, I think when Jason came to me and he said, hey, something's happened, but I'm not going to tell you anything. Let's move on. Really, and I think I lived in shock and denial for 9 long months. I didn't want to open up that door either. As much as I didn't. And so I do see that in myself. And the grieving cycle is cyclical. So like we can go from like denial, shock, and then get angry and then bargain and then back to denial. And yes, you know what I mean?
Yeah, totally.
And so yeah, I definitely have seen that in the wives that I work with. I love this quote from Melody Beattie. She wrote Codependent No More, which, I read that book and I was convinced I was codependent because I think anyone would read that book and be like, oh no, I'm codependent. So I don't know that I recommend it entirely, but what she does say is that I love, she said that denial is the shock absorber for our soul.
Hmm.
And so, yeah, and I like that perspective. I do think there's a place for denial early on. It's almost as if it gives our heart and soul kind of a chance to calibrate while we figure out how what coping mechanisms we can use to start working through this grieving process.
Yeah.
So I appreciate that. And then at the same time, I think there's a lot of danger in staying in a place of shock and denial for a long period of time.
Yeah.
And the one thing that the support groups will do is I feel like it kind of expedites that grieving process. You get on that call and you know this from your support group, it becomes real really quick.
Yeah.
And so what I find is women that aren't ready to go there, they typically back out. They're just like, can't do it,
Yeah.
and it's really hard. I feel like as a facilitator, it's a balance trying to figure out how to, cocoon these women in and speak truth and be real. And at the same time, not not dump on them all at once because I'm afraid they'll bail because it would be too much. So I feel like it's, especially early on when a support group is first getting started, it's a tricky balance dealing with the denial and the shock that these women are going through.
Yeah, absolutely. You're dead right. And I think I really like what you said too about the whole thing is cyclical. So it's not, we don't move linearly from shock to anger to, you're going to go round and round and round. And it could be, it could be years before you leave all shock and denial behind. that
Yeah.
that phase could keep reappearing. And I always think it's really, we have to be very careful because a lot of these words are very pejorative. They have really a negative connotations and it's sometimes
Mhm.
belittling connotations. Shock and denial is a normal part of
Yes.
this journey.
Yes.
I like that quote from Melody Beattie. I didn't like that book. I actually read it and said, Michael, I think you might be codependent as my husband. And he read it and he said, I think you're right. but
That's awesome.
but you're right. By some definitions of codependent, we all are. So,
Right. True.
and that's not a bad thing either. Like, do you know what I mean?
Right.
We use that
Yes.
as a, as a term, like, she must,
Yeah.
but
Right.
it's not like these are just the things, areas of our weakness. This is the areas where there's opportunities for growth.
Well, yeah, and God, I feel like God made us to depend on other people, but there's a balance there,
That's
like
right.
so I agree with you. It is kind of like we take these terms denial, shock, or even maybe codependency sometime and bad, but
Yes.
I mean, yeah, not always the case. So,
No, that's right. Sometimes it's just what we're going through. But with all of these, I'm doing this whole series right now is on pain, and so I'm dealing predominantly with shock, denial, anger, and fear. They're all places you're going to visit on this journey, and you're going to visit it multiple times. You're not going to get out of it in a linear fashion, but they are not places you want to take up residence.
exactly.
And
Well said.
what concerns me is when I see women who have been in one or more of these phases for years and they're not
Mm.
moving forward. And why that concerns me again is not because they're bad people doing a bad thing, but it's because it's chipping away at their souls.
Yes. Oh, yes. I really feel like when when a wife is parked in shock and denial for years, it's real. I love the way you said chipping at their souls. Truly, I feel like ultimately it's a loss of self. They lose their selves. They have, in order to move forward in life, they've had to kind of detach from their reality.
Yeah.
And so it's truly this loss of self. And so I think that's another big thing in these support groups, or even if it's, whatever the avenue is, for a wife to work at owning her voice and being true to how she feels. I feel like that's the beginning of finding themselves again.
Thank you so much for watching episode 1 of the Beyond Betrayal Community interview with Shelley Martinkus of Redemptive Living for Women. Next week, Shelley and I will continue our conversation on shock and denial and how it affects betrayed wives. Until then, may you continue to find the resources and support you need to bring you to greater levels of healing.